Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Cults to Consciousness. Thank you for spending your morning with us. If you are in the States, you're maybe between like 9 and noon, perhaps. But I'm here joined with Kolby Reddish. Thank you so much for joining us, Kolby.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Shelise. Happy
Yeah.
to be with you this morning.
Yeah, Kolby is a good friend of ours, and he was actually on the show. How long ago was that? Maybe like 8 months ago or something crazy?
Yeah, I think something like that.
Yeah, we did an
Yeah.
entire episode called Mormonism on Trial. We talk about his story, talk about because he was a lawyer, how things just didn't add up anymore as far as being Mormon and basically your deconstruction story, which was really great. We should definitely link those in the description. After this is done, I'm going to link those so people can go watch them if they'd like. But the reason I asked Kolby on is because we are discussing a very intense case, and the news just broke a couple days ago. I want to make sure I get the legal jargon right because I have messed up in the past. Sorry, guys, I do my best, but I'm not a lawyer. Kolby is, so he is here to walk us through this trial. If you've seen the title, you know that it is really disturbing stuff we're going to be talking about. In fact, this is a disclaimer, a trigger warning. It is a very, very heavy topic matter. It will involve children. We will be using the abbreviation CSA. And if you're not sure what that means, we'll tag it in the comments. The reason we do this is not because we don't want to say the trigger words, the harsh words. It's because if we do, YouTube will flag our video, unfortunately, or age restrict it. And we believe that getting as many eyes as possible on this is more important than saying those words. So bear with us. Don't get mad at YouTube. They're just trying to keep the platform safe. So we're just going to do our best to kind of work around those words, as well as talk about the gravity of this situation because it is extremely heavy, guys. And there's just a lot to get into about why we are so upset with the Mormon Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, for what is going on. So, Kolby, I'm going to give you the floor. Would you mind just giving us a brief overview of the case, and then we'll dive in a little bit deeper?
Yeah. So within the last week, there was a case involving CSA and the Mormon Church that was reported on last August. It was really first reported on the national scene last August by Mike Resendez, and it comes out of Arizona, and it involves basically the fact that two Mormon bishops knew about CSA from a man named Paul Adams that was, engaging in abuse of two of his children, including one daughter that was only 6 weeks old when the abuse started. It's a really, really horrifying and disgusting case. And I would really advise people, I'm going to give just a very brief overview, but if you want to follow all of the things about this case, you can read every single transcript. You can read the court decisions. And I know because I've accessed those publicly and I've done that. And so this case is really problematic because there are what most people know as mandatory reporting statutes, right? So there are different contact points, usually doctors, teachers, psychologists, counselors, clergy, that in most states are required by law to report CSA if they find out about it and if they have good reason to believe that it's true. They're required to report that basically to authorities like Child Protective Services. And in some states, Arizona included, there are statutes that allow for an exception from those mandatory reporting laws if it's a clergyman that learns of the abuse in the context of a confidential confession or a confidential communication regarding repentance. That's the idea behind these types of statutes. Not all states have this exemption. I think it's actually the minority. I'd have to go pull them all and check, but all states have a mandatory reporting statute. And really, the lawsuit here in this case is being brought on behalf of the daughters who were abused by Mr. Adams. And they're alleging that the Mormon Church, through two different bishops and other church leaders, knew of their abuse and failed to report. Now, originally, the trial court found that the privilege that attached in this case, the exemption from that reporting statute, had been waived by Mr. Adams posting videos and things online regarding the abuse. That decision was overturned, and now the case has been dismissed. And that's really what we're here to talk about is why was the case dismissed and what exactly does that mean? Before we get started, though, one of the things I just wanted to highlight is, and we talked about this in our last episode, Shelise, like the beginning steps of my deconstruction and exit out of the Mormon church really were attached to the fact that my local bishop was also abusing kids, and I saw the exact same situation happening here locally. Not as
Right.
not to the extent, but it was the exact same pattern of where I live. Idaho is just like Arizona. It has an optional exemption from this reporting statute, and the church lawyers basically gave bad advice, just like they did in this case, that didn't, adequately draw to church leaders' attention that they could report if they wanted to. And I know that this is a really sensitive topic, and I know that every time I come on either your podcast or other podcasts, I get a bunch of believers who attack or say things about me after the fact. And one of the things I just wanted to highlight is that this situation, I don't think there's any excuse for this situation. I don't think there's any apologetics that can be spun in this situation. And if people ask me why I feel so strongly about this, one of the reasons is because of lessons I learned inside of Mormonism, ironically, that now, on the outside, I still believe in. And one of those I just wanted to highlight at the outset is in 2003, James Faust, and you probably remember because we're about the same age, he was in Gordon B. Hinckley's first presidency. And he once said in 2003, talking at the church's law school, by the way, he said, "There is great risk in justifying what we do individually and professionally on the basis of what is legal rather than what is right. In so doing, we put our very souls at risk. The philosophy that what is legal is also what is right will rob us of what is highest and best in our nature. What conduct is actually legal is, in many instances, way below the standards of a civilized society and light years below the teachings of Jesus Christ. If you accept what is legal as your standard of personal or professional conduct, you deny yourself that which is truly noble in your personal dignity and worth." And so, obviously, I don't believe some of the theological claims there, but as far as just a human being, I absolutely, and as a lawyer, I absolutely believe that what is legal is not always right, and vice versa. Any thoughts
Mhm.
on that quote to open? Is that kind of the way you were raised also?
Yeah, I think what I can recall from my own childhood is basically you go to the church first. If you have an issue at home, you go tell the bishop. Like, it was never in my purview that police should get involved, but again, I wasn't really having the type of experiences to warrant that. So I don't know exactly if I just am like living in a bubble in Utah growing up, which I may have. But what I clearly remember is if there is any issue going on in your family, it's the bishop that you see. Even if it's extremely personal, the bishop should not be involved in something like that. I remember having very personal, weird family conversations with the bishop instead of my family and thinking, why am I here? This feels really weird. So that's my perception of growing up in Mormonism was just you don't go to anyone else, you just go to the church. And that's exactly what happened here with these bishops because they're told to call a helpline and not call authorities. And so, can you explain to us what that helpline is about within the church standards or the church handbook?
Well, according to what the church's handbook says, the reporting that mandatory, or I'm sorry, not mandatory reporting, that helpline is there to help church leaders understand their need to report. One of the things that Mike Resendez, I think, in his original story with the Associated Press last August, one of the points he's trying to make is that if you look at the pattern, and I'm not saying this is the intent because I don't believe it's the intent. I think this is just mismanagement, like colossal mismanagement, is that the helpline is unfortunately being used basically to silence victims rather than to further the interest of victims, that it's being
Right.
used to create, basically, that it's being used by Curtin McConkie and by the church's other legal actors to basically say, if we don't have a duty to report, then we aren't. And that's exactly what happened in this case. In fact, the attorney, somehow they've gotten access to what the attorney like notes or something that he communicated with these bishops. And one of the things he told them was that they absolutely could not report or that they could not say anything. And the bottom line is, even according to the judge's decision dismissing the case, based on the fact that the clergy penitent privilege applied, that wasn't the truth. It's a permissive, In other words, it's
Mhm.
an optional exception. It's an optional thing that keeps the church from not necessarily having to report. It is a choice. And in this case, it's just indisputable that the church decided not to, and that they've won the case on that very basis.
Yeah, and let's get into the weeds with that. First, I want to mention that for those who aren't aware, Mormon bishops are not trained in any sort of clergy capacity to have this role over this entire congregation and to have these personal one-on-one interviews. Again, if you aren't aware about confessions, you go in as early as 12 years old and confess sexual sins. I'm doing this in air quotes if you're only listening, because it's, in my opinion, CSA just being in a room alone with an old man prying into my sex life as a child, like that is already, I have a huge issue with it. And it's something that I've had to deconstruct after leaving for 12 years, because so many times I'm like, oh yeah, and then we would confess to the bishop. Like, you don't even have anything to confess. You don't even understand what sexuality is. There's like, this is a whole different discussion. But I'm realizing as I get older and deconstruct that that in itself is very abusive, in my opinion. So you have this guy who's like the neighborhood plumber or dentist or just your neighbor, or maybe it's your friend's dad, who is called to this position and holds this authority and is supposed to speak for God on your behalf and is supposed to grant you forgiveness for whatever thing you've done wrong. And the problem with that is they're just not trained, they're not equipped to handle these conversations to begin with. So I know a lot of people are going to want to point the fingers at the bishop, which, yes, but also realizing where this bishop is coming from, not having any experience. He's not a lawyer. He doesn't know what the
Right.
rules are. He is just going along with, okay, what do I do? Okay, I'm going to call the helpline because that's what they told me to do. And when he does, he's literally told by the attorneys, by the church's official attorneys, the McConkey office, to not report it. And so I don't know. I mean, there, of course, there's some people who have spoken out. Shoot, I always forget the bishop's name, who was
Sam
excommunicated
Young.
because Sam Young did not want to do one-on-one interviews with children and talk about their sex lives. So, yes, there are people who are able to stand up and be like, no, something feels wrong. But I just have to point out the indoctrination, especially if you're born and raised in this. You are not taught to question anything. You're not taught to listen to your intuition. You're just told to go with what they tell you to do. And if the higher ups, if the people at the top are telling you don't report this, chances are you're not going to. And so I just had to point that out. But can you speak on a little bit as far as like the inner workings? Because I know you're familiar with the case on how Elder McConkey's office did have multiple interactions with these bishops.
Yeah. So one of the things that we do know is that the bishops were, they were basically trying to work with Paul for years and work with the mother for years to try and get this behavior to stop. But one of the things they never did was, call police. One of
Mhm.
the headline of Mike Rosenda's August piece is about how church leaders knew about this CSA for 7 years before anything was done. And it wasn't ultimately the church that did anything.
Right.
Paul Adams was basically recording himself doing these acts of abuse on his kids,
Oh
and
my
they
gosh.
were they were actually discovered clear around the world in New Zealand. And
Wow.
so Department of Homeland Security got involved, and that's basically a follow-up investigation is how it ultimately came to light. One of the things I wanted to read, I really like your comments, Shelise, too, by the way, about the bishops, because I do have a lot of charity for them. The law is really complicated. Like, even for lawyers, like we, have to read things multiple times and talk with each other sometimes about how it all works. And so I don't fault them for not knowing what the law is. I
Mhm.
do kind of question the excuse of, well, I was just being, I was just doing what I was being told. You're absolutely right that that's what
Right.
Mormonism conditions you to do, conditions you in this kind of form of infantilization, of being okay with being told to do things that are really, really questionable. But I still think, they're still people. And while I can understand and sympathize, and I'm sure it's been really, really difficult on them as this case has come to light, I still think they completely failed. And if we look at that quote that we read at the at the start of this from James Faust, I think he would also agree that they would fail. One of the quotes I wanted to read from the actual transcripts that kind of, I think, underlines the role that the bishops played in this case is basically that they could have been a stop to this. Obviously, they can't have stopped it they can't have stopped Paul Adams from ever originally doing this type of conduct. But when it came to their knowledge, that's basically what the sentencing judge in the mother's criminal prosecution case highlighted. So I want to read a quote from the transcripts of that sentencing. So the judge said to Miss Adams, and a sentencing judge, by the way, is going to have heard a lot of different evidence in reaching this conclusion. This is one of the reasons that I think Mike Resendez really highlighted the role that the church had, was this statement from this sentencing. So I'll go ahead and read that transcript now, that part of the transcript. The judge said to her, Miss Adams, if you had done what you should have done or could have done back in either 2010 or 2011, it's a little unclear to me whether it was 1 year or the other year when you first learned for a certainty what your husband had done with your older daughter, if you had called the police, I didn't hear from the bishop directly. He wasn't here to testify. So I'm hesitant to make judgments or pronouncements about his situation when I haven't heard directly from him. But I will say, had he called the police or taken some action, rather than apparently acted out of hope, rather than out of some sense of responsibility for these children, had you done something, Miss Adams, back in 2010 or 2011, these crimes wouldn't have happened. Count 1 happened in 2015. Count 2 happened somewhere between or within the time span of 2015 and 2017. Those things wouldn't have happened if, when the bishop called you in here and said, listen to what Paul is telling me about, I'm going to substitute a word here, abusing at that time, your only daughter, if you had done something, if the bishop had done something, if someone had acted out of a sense to help these children and not worrying about, well, am I going to get in a problem with this church or things along those lines? Whatever people were thinking, if people were acting out of a sense of responsibility for these children, then these two crimes wouldn't have happened at all. Against the older child, she still would have been the victim of Mr. Adams' conduct up to that point, but it wouldn't have continued. And the second daughter wouldn't have been victimized at all because she hadn't been born yet. But she wasn't protected. She wasn't protected by you. She wasn't protected by the bishop. She wasn't protected, certainly not by her father. She wasn't protected by anybody. That's what the sentencing judge felt. And so you can understand why the lawsuit against the church basically proceeded and was dismissed this week.
So this is news to me, and I should have dived into this a little bit more, but I have you here. So I'm glad that I have you here to give more details. I didn't realize that mom knew.
Yes.
Okay,
Mom knew.
Oh, okay. I feel like that changes things quite a bit, because it's not just the guy, the dad, the perpetrator going into the bishop and feeling remorse and feeling sorry, and the bishop not knowing what to do. Like, what do I do? Call the church office. Don't say anything. This is the mother of the child who was being abused perpetually. She knew and didn't do anything. That to me is astonishing.
Yeah, I think in so many ways the judge nailed it. So many people failed these poor children. That's the reality of this case. And one of the things that's just so mind-boggling to me is that, the church did like a press release yesterday, like celebrating the fact that this case was dismissed, at least for now. There's the potential that the children are going to get to appeal the judge's decision. And so we'll see how that works up. But, I don't believe that was the intended effect. Obviously, I don't believe that the church intends for child abuse to ever happen. But the fact that you don't intend something to happen doesn't mean that it isn't a result of your policy decisions or your policies or your conduct. And so that's the part of this case that makes me so sick, is that I feel like Mormonism raised me different than this, better than this, to not allow for this type of thing to happen. I can just tell you, as someone who does have to have, privileged communication and understands attorney-client privilege very well, that there would be no way that I would be okay with not saying something. If reporting on If reporting on someone cost me my law license, but it saved a child, that's fine. Like, I'm fine with that calculus, right? That's one of the reasons I don't do criminal law anymore, is so that I don't have to deal with that type of darkness, that type of pain. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, and I think one of the things that also just makes me so sad about this case is that, as silly as some of the Mormon theological beliefs are, and as problematic as some of them are, Mormons, for the most part, are otherwise very, very good, kind people. I think they have some very misaligned priorities because of the way the church is like conditioned and raised them. But for the
Mhm.
most part, I think Mormons really, really try to be kind to people around them. And I think the church is taking advantage of them on this issue. That the church continues to claim that it cares about victims while it's, using these optional clergy penitent privileges to not report ongoing CSA cases, and I just can't stomach that. I wish more members would wake up, and there have been some that have tried to like hold the church accountable, like you highlighted, Sam Young and others. There's an organization actually called Floodlit that tries to draw attention to the fact that there's so much abuse in the LDS church and
Mhm.
the way that the church responds to it. Um, I wanted to read one other thing. So when Resendez reported on this case back last August, the church did not just one, but two different press releases kind of outlining their take on the facts of the case. And I want to read from their second press release, which was from later in August. The
Okay.
church stated, in connection with this very case, I'm going to read a few paragraphs of the introduction to that press release. They stated, for generations, leaders of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints have spoken in the strongest of terms about the evils of abuse and the need to care for those who are victims or survivors. From the thundering rebuke of former President Gordon B. Hinckley to the recent words of healing offered by Elder Patrick Kieran of the Presidency of the 70, our feelings are clear. We echo those sentiments and teachings today. Our hearts are broken as we learn of any abuse. It cannot be tolerated. It cannot be excused. The Savior Jesus Christ wants us all to do better and be better. It is important to us that our members and friends understand how deeply we feel. Sorry, how deeply we feel about this important matter, and that they have accurate information about how we approach this matter. Church leaders and members are instructed in the church's general handbook that their priorities related to abuse are as follows. Number one, assure that child sexual abuse is stopped. Number two, help victims receive care, including from professionals. Number three, comply with whatever reporting is required by law. And I think really what I wanted to highlight is that, like, that's just a lie based on the facts of this case alone. Like, to hold up as some type of victory that this case was dismissed because they complied with the bare minimum of the law,
Right.
those priorities are exactly backwards, according to what the church said about this very case. And then, the church also has an entire section on their website about abuse, like a topic. They have like these topic, not the gospel topics essays, but they have these like topic pages. And I pulled this quote right from the church's website on abuse yesterday. It says, the first responsibility of church leaders is to help those who have been abused and to protect those who may be vulnerable to future abuse. And so I guess I
Mhm.
just ask you, Shelise, I know that some of the legal stuff can get technical, but like, that's what the church says its priorities are. Do you see those priorities reflected in the church's behavior connected with this case?
Well, no. I mean, it's very clear to me that they don't care about the children in these cases. They just care about protecting their image. And I wanted to get into this as a topic of discussion for today because I feel like that is literally the only thing that makes sense to me based on how they've handled this and how they're celebrating this win and how we're also going to get into how they're lobbying to continue to have this law in place so they don't have to report abusers. And it's just so frustrating, and it also hits very close to home for me, this particular story, so it's hard for me to kind of get through the level head because I'm already reeling and spinning out here. But I think what is so obvious is that they will say all of these placated things. Of course, we don't want this to happen. Of course, we want to protect the kids, and family is everything. And on the outside, people believe it. And like you were saying, the
Mm-hmm.
members are generally really good people, and they believe it with their whole hearts, because why wouldn't they? The church that they love, that they believe is the one true church on earth, wants to protect kids, so why would it be any different? And then you see cases like this where they're actively protecting the abuser. And to me, it's just they will say whatever they need to say to get people to stay on their side and not point fingers at them. But behind closed doors, they are not protecting kids. They're protecting their image, because what would happen if all of these cases came out, if the church was getting sued right and left for not reporting or whatever the case may be? Now the church has to say, oh, I guess we do breed abusers, or I guess abuse is rampant in the church. They would have to admit that something is still off, that just because you're a member, it doesn't mean you have the spirit of the Lord or whatever. And I know they talk about, like, yes, if you sin, this Holy Ghost goes away, but it's just everything points to they don't want to be seen as a church with sexual abusers, right? It just feels like they're handling it in such a way to protect the Mormon corporation or the LDS corporation, because they don't use Mormon anymore because that's bad for branding. They are just trying to keep it together and make their members believe they're doing everything they can to protect those kids when clearly they are not.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was going to say. I feel like we could apply the principle of charity. I definitely think the end result is that, especially in this case and in other cases I've looked at and reviewed, the church's behavior ends up protecting and shielding the abuser. I don't believe that's the intent. And I want to be really clear about that. I don't think they go in thinking we're going to protect abusers. I think, like you hit the nail on the head, like, I think it's just a very, very messed up priority in a system that believes it's immune to criticism. Like, if you really believe that, these lawyers are making the calls that Jesus would make, you're just kidding yourself. Like, Elder Faust even said it. Like, the law in Arizona and the judge's decision yesterday, or not yesterday, but earlier this week, dismissing the case, made clear that this was an optional exemption. Like, they could have reported, and Paul
Yeah.
Adams couldn't have sued them. The mother couldn't have sued them. Like, I mean, I guess technically I should say anyone can sue anyone for any reason, but like, it would just be dismissed very easily, very early in the case. And like, also, how does that look? Like, you're abusing your kids and you're going to sue the church. Like, anyone's ever going to side with an abuser in court over a church that
Right.
took steps to report. And I think that's one of the things is like, in these states where it's an option to report, in some states, churches are required to report. I know
Yeah.
that like a state like California is in that type of, there's basically like these different jurisdictional decisions. And I think California is one that does not have an exemption. States like Idaho, Utah, and Arizona do have a clergy penitent privilege / reporting exemption. And
Okay.
and I think one of the things I wanted to highlight is the Arizona statute here, and the judge's decision builds on this. It allows for the clergy not to report, and I'm going to quote from the statute, if the priest or member of the clergy determines that it is reasonable and necessary within the concepts of the religion. So that's the effect of what the church's argument was in this case, that they believe in confidential communications so much that it's reasonable and necessary under the concepts of their religion not to report. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to read those lines from the press release and from the handbook, because it's like, I don't even think that's correct. Like, I know that courts are very reticent to second guess like a religious institution's representations about what its doctrines are, but you have clear lines on the church's website today and in its handbook today that are basically indicating that it protects victims when it doesn't. And that's the part that bothers me. It bothers me very badly that, like you highlighted, and this is again reported by Mike Resendez in his Associated Press story, that the church has worked with other churches to lobby to keep these exemptions in place for reporting. And I don't exactly know why. I don't want to like
Mhm.
guess because I've never actually seen those lobbying documents and stuff myself. I just know that it's been reported that the church has worked with other churches to do that. But one of the things that
Yeah.
makes me so mad is like, if the law gives you the option not to report, why can't you just be honest about the fact that that's what you're doing? But instead, you're representing to your members and to the rest of the world that you put victims first when you very clearly don't, based on the facts of this case, based on the facts of my local case, and based on the facts of other cases that I've looked at. Floodlit has, I think floodlit.org has thousands of entries of Mormon sex abuse and outlines like what the person's calling was, what their,
Mhm.
all the news stories connected to it. Like, if people think this is some outlier case, Paul Adams was an absolute monster, and the church isn't responsible wholly for obviously his behavior, but they could have stopped it. And that's the point, is
Yeah.
that I was raised, ironically, inside of Mormonism to believe that if you can help people, you have a duty to help those people. So I don't understand why the church can't take its own medicine and do what it taught me and people like you that are now outside of it to do. If you say you prioritize victims, then do it. Period.
Yeah. Absolutely agree. And there's a few things I wanted to touch on with everything that you just said. Well said, by the way. I put this comment on the screen because it's mentioning Catholicism. And from what I read in one of the articles about this case was that the Catholic Church, Jehovah's Witnesses, and the Mormon Church were all lobbying together to keep these privileged laws in place because they don't want to be mandatory reporters. Is that right, as far as you're aware?
That is what has been reported by Mike Resendez. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. The other thing that I wanted to mention, oh man, it's just even so hard to get through. The fact that the church is just saying, the Mormon church is just saying, well, we report when we feel like it's necessary. And I'm thinking, you didn't think that this was a case where you should have immediately called the police and got this man in prison because he was recording the abuse and putting it online. And I'm trying very hard not to cry right now. And it was out there in the world. The only reason this man got caught was because Homeland Security found the video, like you said, in was New Zealand,
I
and they were
believe
like,
so.
"Oh, we should do something about this because this is horrific." And that is how this man got caught. Meanwhile, these bishops knew about this abuse and it continued for years.
Mhm.
Years.
Mhm.
And like you said before, and I'm just like really drilling it in so people can have a full understanding, like right in front of you. This is the dirty, filthy, disgusting truth. It went from the oldest daughter to the next daughter. It continued through
Right.
multiple children. And the Mormon church was like, "No, do not report this." Why? Why? And I want to get your opinion. Is it do you think it's just because of the image thing? Why else would they tell this man, this bishop, multiple times because they had multiple meetings with the law offices? Why would they tell him not to report this?
Yeah. Before I answer that question, one of the things I want to highlight is in the church's second press release, they really dispute Resendez's reporting on how much the bishops knew and how often they were meeting with the Kurt McConkie law office or speaking to one of the church's legal team. But that discussion continued between two bishops over multiple years. That's been outlined even in the story talking about the dismissal of this case. And so
Mhm.
for anyone who thinks like, well, maybe the church just didn't know the extent of it, I'm sure that's true to a degree. But the bottom line is they knew this abuse was ongoing. You don't meet with multiple bishops over multiple years and not know that this is an ongoing problem.
Yeah.
So to get back to answer your question, I do think that, like, I don't think this is by design. I don't fully understand why the church doesn't just come out and have a universal policy that says, guess what? We're putting this in our handbook right now so that you know, if you come to a bishop and you're telling them that you're abusing kids, our policy is we just report always. Anytime we have the option, which by
No
the
matter
way
what
is
the
in.
law says.
Right. And that's another important piece is people are often very confused about this and say that the law like prevented the bishops from reporting. That absolutely wasn't the case in Arizona. It's not the case in Idaho. It's not the case in Utah. And as far as I know, it's not the case anywhere in the United States that the law actively prevents a clergyman from reporting. It gives them
Yeah.
an option not to
Right.
if they consider it part of their religious practices. And that's one of the reasons that when Cami, my wife, and I really, after we appeared on Mormon Stories and really got involved in trying to understand the issue of CSA in the Mormon Church, we tried to work with Salt Lake to improve its policies, and we were just completely blown off, just like basically Sam Young was. Ultimately, they did adopt some of his recommendations, not all of them. But yeah, I do think it is this whole broken image of, well, we need to protect the good name of the church. I think that's what it is. And I really don't understand it, because the church would just get a lot more quarter. It would get a lot more legitimacy if it would just have that clear policy, which some other denominations have, by the way. They have the policy of, we don't shelter sex abusers, period.
Yeah.
And we report the instant you tell us, guess what? It's going to be reported. And as long as that is a clear stated policy of the church, which it could do tomorrow if it wanted to, then no one can really complain about it. If it's in the manual, they can just hold it out to any potential lawsuit challenging them, disclosing to authorities and say, this was the clear policy. Like, you should have known this going in. And I can just say, as someone who has to deal with the legal system and deal with lawsuits, I would much rather be sued as the church for reporting when I didn't have to, and someone saying, well, you didn't have to report, than dealing with the lawsuit they're dealing with right now, which is, you allowed abuse to continue for 7 years, and you were part of what allowed abuse to continue for 7 years, and you didn't report when you should have. Like, I would much rather be sued for the first than the second.
Yeah, and it makes no sense to me, especially when you claim to be the only true church, the restored, the actual restored church of Jesus Christ himself, and yet you don't have a policy in place that's clearly protecting the children, clearly talking to the authorities about this. It baffles me. It makes absolutely no sense, and it's disgusting, and it's wrong. And I'm glad that you brought up the whole Utah's not a mandatory reporting state, because we did a live on the Ruby Franke, Jody Hildebrandt cases. Again, more cases of CA, I guess, no S in this case, at least that we know of. And I had mentioned, I wondered if any of them had ever talked to their bishop about this, because I was familiar with this case, and knowing that sometimes it goes unreported, and everyone in the comments was like, no, you have to be a mandatory reporter. And I was like, I don't think that that's the case in all states. So I'm glad that you mentioned that's not the case for Utah. I just wanted to bring up this super chat. Thank you so much, Kat. Really appreciate you for this super chat. Oscar's jumping on me. He's excited too. Wow, just stumbled on your live. Do you know of any religions that don't abuse? Your channel is so eye-opening. Been enjoying it for some time. Thank you so much. I have not come across one personally. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But obviously, when you have a channel that focuses on bringing light to dark places, that's what you're going to find, is the dark places. And so, yeah, it can get really heavy and really intense. Thank you so much for watching and for your super chat. Guys, super chats are greatly appreciated. They're not required, but they will be prioritized as far as questions go. And I think we're nearing the end of like the storytelling part. So if you guys have any questions for Kolby or myself specifically, you can drop them in the chat. Okay, was there anything else that you wanted to talk about, Kolby?
No, I think I've really gotten through all of the notes I had prepared. I would really push people to not take everything I say. Like, I want people, this is something you'll never get from the church. Go do your own research.
Right.
Like, don't just trust everything I've said. I feel everything I've said is absolutely accurate, but I also welcome correction if I misstated anything here slightly. One of the things I would encourage people to do is get to the bottom of this for yourself. Like, that's what I decided to do when this case was originally reported on, because I was still kind of deciding we actually didn't resign from the church until after this case was reported on, because we were actively concerned about this issue inside of the church. And then when this story was reported on, it was just like, okay, well, this is just, for some reason, they have no interest in like changing this issue. And I don't understand it, because I really believe that if you took a vote of all active Mormons, 95+% would tell you that the church does report every time. And that's just not the truth. And we see that in case after case after case. And that's the part that's the most frustrating to me, is the law, as broken as it is, and we've already touched on the fact that the church has lobbied to keep it the way that it is, allows for them not to report at their option. It doesn't have to be that way. They could report if they wanted to now, but even with that, they choose not to. And they continue to hold out to members and to members of the public that they do. And that's the part that bothers me, is at least be honest about your decision. And guess where else I learned that from, Shelise? It was from the Mormon church, was to be honest.
Yes,
they really don't
exactly.
like they really, really don't like when you take the lessons you learned inside and apply it to
And use it
themselves, I
against
can
them.
tell you that.
Accountability, what's that?
Yeah,
Repentance, what's that? We don't say that
that's
we're
right.
sorry. We just say we never taught that.
But no,
Um,
I know
Go
I've
ahead.
been really strong about the church and some of its policies here. I say this every time. I'm like, I love Mormon people. If you're an active believer, I'm not trying to take away your faith. But you can disagree with the way the church is handling these cases, and I would encourage you to get to the bottom of it for yourself. Don't just take me
Yeah.
at my word. Do your own research. Come to your own conclusions about this case based on the primary documents. Like, go back to the transcripts and stuff. I read you a quote from the sentencing transcript. Go read those things before you reach your conclusion, but you don't have to agree with everything the church does just because you believe in its theological claims or just because it's been important to you or important to your family. That's what I'm asking people to make space for, is make space for the fact that the church can still be whatever you think it is today and be wrong on this one issue.
Yeah. And I do want to point out before I forget, in case anyone is wondering what has happened to the perpetrator, as far as I'm aware, he unalived himself while in custody. Is
Correct.
that
He
okay?
did.
Yeah. I I just think that, like you said, most people have absolutely no idea that this is going on behind the scenes because that's not the church we were raised in, right? We
Mhm.
were raised that this is the true, honest church and they do everything with God by their side and they are led by God and the prophets are led by God and spoken to by God. And you just have this image. You put them on a pedestal and it's like, wow, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is a true church and I'm part of it and I'm awesome too. And I get it. I've been there. I was that person, 100% very devout, would defend the church at any turn. So, the reason that we do these podcasts and the reason that we bring light to this is so, like you said, current members of the church who have this bright, shiny idea of it can get taken down a notch and realize, oh, there's something else going on here. And it's okay to disagree and still have faith, like you said, if that's what you want to do, if that's what makes you happy. But we just want people to have all the information, all of the facts, so that they know what that church that they love so dearly is doing or not doing to protect this family unit that they hold in such high esteem.
Right.
Because I was shocked to hear about this. And what I would have loved, Colby, what I would have loved is instead of the church saying, yay, we did it, we won, they didn't have to report the abuse. How about a press release that's something like, we are in shock. We did not realize that this was not reported, which that would have been a lie because their official attorneys told them not to do it. But pretend their official attorneys didn't know and they didn't get involved in all of that. And they
Right.
said, "We it has come to our attention that cases like this have been going unnoticed for far too long. It is time that we step up our game. It is time that we protect these kids. It is time that we make this mandatory reporting in every single state, regardless of the laws. We want our bishops to protect these children." How much more powerful would that have been? I would
Right.
have been like, wow, good job. I will give you a round of applause for stepping up, actually owning your mistakes, taking accountability, and making amends and making reparations to help the future of this church that is crumbling because so many people are leaving when they hear about stuff like this and they're just
Right.
confused, which I get it. It is confusing to hear about stuff like this when you put all of your heart and your soul into this organization. This is not just a go on Sundays type of church. It is your entire life. It is your entire existence, your identity. And I know because I was part of it. You know how it is
Hmm.
when you're Mormon. It is you. That is who you are, whether or not you want to admit it. So I just wish that they would evolve instead of devolve just
Right.
to protect their name. I wish they would own up to some things and make changes, real changes that can actually save children, can save lives, can save
Right.
any of this trauma from ever happening. And by putting their foot down and really, truly standing as a representative of Jesus Christ, if that's what they want to claim, it's just I'm just on my soapbox. So I'm getting a little riled
No,
up.
I mean, I completely agree. Hearing you talk about what you want, like, I'm just going to come back to the real simple statement on the church's website about abuse, and it's there today. Like, it says the first responsibility of church leaders is to help those who have been abused and to protect those who may be vulnerable to future abuse. You have that in your manual. Do it.
Stand
Like,
up to
do it.
that.
Stop saying you're doing that and then making the complete opposite argument when you're in court. Like, do what you say. You taught me to do it. You do it. That's
Mhm.
my takeaway is stop claiming to do something that you're not doing and that is demonstrable that you're not doing. Stop it.
Yes. And on top of that, it's not that they're just not doing something, it's that they're actively lobbying to keep
Right.
these laws in place. Guys, they are just saying one thing and doing the complete opposite, putting money and time and effort and resources into keeping these laws in place so they don't have to be mandatory reporters. It's just,
Right.
it blows my mind. And it gets me so worked up and angry, and I'm so glad that I'm not a part of it anymore.
Me too.
Ugh.
Me too. I no, honestly, so I went to BYU. So I have BYU on my resume and I hate it because
Ugh.
I don't want I mean as much as I love the Mormon people and as much as I love so many things that I learned from being raised in that culture, there's a lot of bad things too. But some of the things I love, but like I'm honestly embarrassed to have that on my resume because this is like people who are not even connected to Mormonism except tangentially, like they're following this story, they're seeing this stuff, and I don't want anyone to ever think that I would be okay with that. And that's one of the
Right.
reasons I've been so outspoken on this topic is the church is wrong and it needs to repent, like it taught
Mhm.
us.
Yeah. It needs to take accountability and make changes, actual changes, step up their game. This is my call to the leaders of the church who will never see this. Change your game. Actually protect the people you are claiming to protect. Do the work, no matter if it puts a stain on your image. This is actually a quite bigger stain. Even though you're trying to hide it and pretend like it didn't happen and have these fuzzy press releases about we protect the kids, people know because there's the internet
Mhm.
now and people can find out what you're really up to.
Right.
So, with that, I feel like we have exhausted this unless I just keep talking in circles because I'm so riled up about it. Thank you so much for coming on
Of course.
and
Thank you.
talking this through with me. I was like, who's the person for this? Kolby. Kolby's my guy. I need to call him. I
Well,
called him
thank you.
yesterday. So, thanks for being willing to jump on so last minute.
Of course, can I just say how much I love how much attention and how much growth your channel has seen? It's you're doing
Thank
amazing
you.
things, and I try and listen to as much as I can. So I'm happy to come back anytime. Thank you for inviting me.
Yay! You're our resident lawyer officially.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think when we had you on, we were at, like, not even 5,000 subscribers, maybe? I don't know.
I
It's
don't remember. I think maybe like 30,000 or something.
was it 30? Was it that not
Maybe.
that long ago? Maybe in March? Anyway, doesn't matter. Guys, thank you so much for jumping on with us. We've had quite a few people. The comments have been off the charts. I didn't have Jonathan today. He had to go run do something, so I was kind of like trying to scroll through your comments and feature the ones that caught my eye. So thank you for joining us today on this Saturday morning or wherever you are in the world. If you want to support the podcast, you can get some of our merch. This is one of my favorites, Apostates Unite. I found when a lot of ex-Mormons would put in the comments something about I was ex-Mormon, I would always say Apostates Unite. So this is one of my favorites. Our bestseller though has got to be the I'm sorry for what I said when I was in a cult t-shirt. Everyone loves that one. And you can find that on our website at cultstoconsciousness.com under the merch tab. And we are finalizing our details for our first C2C vacation together. It's going to be so exciting. I can't tell you where we're going yet, but we are finalizing all of that. So if you want to be one of the first to be able to sign up, because there's going to be limited spots, we did put a link in the description where you can click enter your email so you will get the notification when the trip goes live. And yeah, that's about it. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Have an amazing day. Like and subscribe, of course. Help boost the algorithm so more people can see this. And I think that's it. Any final thoughts, Kolby?
No, thank you so much, and thanks for all the kind comments I could see on the side. Thank you, everybody.
Yay. Thanks, guys. Continue to comment after the live ends because it also helps the algorithm. And until next time, follow your highest excitement, be conscious, and be well.